let's begin. So let's start with our first presenter.
Okay. My name is Amanda Wright, and my talk today is about looking at longitudinal trends of person-centered personality consistency using profile correlations. So personality consistency can also be referred to as ipsative consistency or within-person personality consistency. This occurs at the individual level, and it represents the consistency of the configuration of traits within a single person across time, or the consistency of their personality profiles. In terms of past research, not a ton has been done with longitudinal profile consistency. Single profile correlations are often averaged across individuals to determine what an average profile correlation is. And this is done almost exclusively with 2 waves of data, so just 1 profile correlation per individual. From this research, we know that this value is pretty high, usually ranging from 0.60 to the mid-0.70s, or around where that red star in the example graph is. However, really only knowing this value can be a problem because it doesn't tell us whether this pretty moderate stability is an inherent property of the person or if it is perhaps due to random or environmental fluctuations instead. So it is unclear if this stability extends across time and if this average pattern applies to different individuals. Again, we know what the average profile correlation value tends to be, and that is marked by the red star. And we can consider the 2 dotted and dashed lines to represent 2 hypothetical people. For person A, we see that their consistency alternates between increasing and dropping off across waves. So we could say that there are likely random and environmental factors at play for this person that influence their degree of consistency across time. But if we had someone like person B, where their level of consistency remains stable, then we could conclude that some people are likely just consistent in their level of consistency, and that this is probably a property of the person. So for our research questions, we wanted to know if there are individual differences in person-centered consistency and in relative changes in it across time. So while people in general are consistent, are some people more consistent than others in the long term? Said another way, is consistency itself an individual difference? As for the other part of this question, we wanted to know, do some people become more or less consistent over time relative to their own person average level? We've seen suggestions of this with between-person assessments, such as with test-retest correlations for a single trait, and that they tend to increase in magnitude with increasing age. But there aren't really tests of this at an individual profile level. So in our current study, we examined trends of within-person personality consistency using item-level profile correlations across 4 to 9 waves of data. The only measures in our study were those for the Big 5 personality traits, and we did this across 4 longitudinal datasets. Each dataset had at least a couple thousand people and spanned across a total of up to 12 years. And then in order to look at individual differences in personality consistency across waves, we modeled the trends in these profile correlations across the people in each dataset using a series of Bayesian multi-level nonlinear asymptotic models. In short, we found that people are consistent in how consistent or inconsistent they are. That is, regardless if someone's initial value of consistency was 0.3 or 0.8, people roughly maintain this person-centered average level of consistency across time. There were differences in the magnitude of the initial profile correlations as well as in the variability around these initial profile correlations across datasets. As for the magnitude of changes across time, we found average slight increases in within-person consistency across waves, and also notable variability around these changes. And this average effect suggests that people become slightly more solidified versions of who they were immediately prior. And this possibly alludes to some idiosyncratic set point of personality consistency around which people roughly maintain. However, there were individual differences in these changes. In the graphs to the left, there are trajectories of profile consistency from 100 random participants in each dataset. On the x-axis is the wave of the profile correlation, and on the y-axis is the value of the profile correlation. And in this graph, we're able to see a glimpse of this variability, both for intercepts and changes in consistency across time. So personality, in order to be personality, by definition, needs there to be some degree of stability in it. And stability and profile consistency offers one source of constancy in personality for individuals. Future studies could build off of these findings and further examine the dynamics underlying these variable patterns of consistency. And my email and Twitter are on the bottom right corner of this slide in case anyone would like to reach out and hear a bit more about this project or ask any questions. And thank you all for listening.
Thanks so much, Amanda. All right, let's move on to the next presenter.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Shields, and apologies for the very long talk title here. Basically, I'm going to be talking to you about a twin study of self-regulation and psychopathology. So self-regulation is the ability to modulate one's emotions, cognitions, and behaviors in order to carry out goal-directed activities. Lower self-regulation has been tied to a number of psychiatric diagnoses, including anxiety and depressive disorders, substance abuse, conduct disorders, and so on. And because of this, it's thought to be one of many dimensions that might underlie shared variance across psychiatric diagnostic boundaries, sometimes called the P factor. However, studying self-regulation can be difficult because self-regulation definitions encompass constructs that map onto a lot of different theoretical traditions and different measurement approaches. For example, executive functions and conscientiousness are both kind of under the self-regulation umbrella, and terms like these are sometimes used interchangeably despite them not having strong empirical associations with each other. This jingle fallacy is really problematic because it prevents a full understanding of which aspects of self-regulation might be associated with broad psychopathology. And there's plenty of evidence to suggest that personality-based and report-based measures of self-regulation, like conscientiousness, might have stronger etiological links with psychopathology compared to more cognitive or task-based measures. So in this study, we were interested in whether executive functions accounted for incremental genetic and environmental variance in youth psychopathology beyond the variance accounted for by conscientiousness. So in this study, we had data from 1,219 twins and multiples. They were about 10 and a half years old, and they were recruited from the Texas Twin Project down at the University of Texas and University of Houston. You can see the measures we used there. And the way that we answer this type of research question is using a Koleski decomposition. A Koleski decomposition is sort of akin to a multiple regression, but it allows us to incorporate this nice twin design. So in a study, because we were interested in whether executive functions accounted for genetic and non-shared environmental variance in psychopathology beyond what was accounted for by conscientiousness, we entered conscientiousness first, and then executive functions second, and then psychopathology last. So I'm going to add in the effects here. And the blue lines are the ones that we care about for the purposes of this talk, and solid lines indicate statistically significant effects. These effects that you see are squared parameter estimates, so they can be interpreted as the proportion of variance accounted for. So the numbers in blue are the proportion of genetic or non-shared environmental variance in psychopathology that can be accounted for by the conscientiousness factor and then by the executive function factor controlling for conscientiousness. And what we see is that conscientiousness really is doing the legwork here. So about 12% of the genetic variance in psychopathology is accounted for by executive functions and conscientiousness together, but most of that is due to substantial genetic variance shared between conscientiousness and psychopathology. The genetic variance in psychopathology that's uniquely shared with executive function after controlling for conscientiousness is small, only about 2%. And then as we see here, the non-shared environmental overlap between psychopathology and both self-regulation factors was small and non-significant. And this brings me to two main conclusions. The first is that variation in general psychopathology highly overlaps with conscientiousness, and this relationship is primarily mediated by genetic factors, which suggests that the two share a similar etiology. The second is that executive functions don't account for substantial variance in broad psychopathology in youth beyond conscientiousness, suggesting that report-based and personality-based measures of self-regulation might be more etiologically connected to broad psychopathology versus task-based self-regulation measures. So feel free to email me. My email is here. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And that's all I have for you today.
Excellent. Thanks, Allison. Let's move on to our third presenter.
I'm trying to share screen for my presentation, but it's not showing up.
1 second. All right, should be working.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Oh, great. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Kunst, and today I will be presenting about the strategies healthcare leaders implement to regulate the emotions of their followers. So, healthcare workers work often long days in stressful environments, and I think we can all really understand that during the global pandemic, this was just worsened. And it also really made us realize how important these workers are for us in our society. So when we experience stress at work, like John here on the left, we regulate our own emotions. And this is called intrinsic emotion regulation. We know quite a lot about that. A lot of research has been done. However, we are social beings, and especially at work, we interact with people all the time. And we don't know that much about this extrinsic emotion regulation. That is how we regulate the emotions of others. So if you look at Shushin here on the right, she just had to manage a difficult patient and she is just not feeling great. She can regulate her own emotions, so she might try to reappraise her feelings, seeing it as an opportunity to grow. Or she might try to suppress her feelings, not show it on her face. We know from research that when she reappraises her own emotions, she's more likely to experience a higher job satisfaction and lower burnout. But we also know that when she suppresses her emotions, she's likely to have a lower job satisfaction and higher burnout. However, when Shushin is struggling at work, she might approach her team leader for help and support. And we know quite a lot about follower-leader interactions in a strategic and operational way, but not that much about the strategies that leaders implement to improve the work and well-being outcomes of followers. And that's what this research is about. So we conducted research with real workers in a hospital in China. And this is in a collectivist culture. So a lot of the research on intrinsic emotion regulation is conducted in weird samples. So this study helps us extend findings from intrinsic regulation to extrinsic regulation, but also helps us generalize to a collectivist sample. So we collected data at 2 time points in the hospital. And at time point 1, we asked both leaders and followers how the leaders try to improve the feelings of followers at work. We also asked followers to report on their affect at work and their intrinsic regulation. At time 2, we only asked the followers about their own job satisfaction, their burnout, and their affect at work. We modeled these findings using multi-level modeling. We modeled both the reports from the leaders as well as the reports of the followers. And only the reports of the followers were significant, as you can see with the solid lines. So reappraisal led to lower burnout and higher job satisfaction, whereas suppression led to a higher burnout and lower job satisfaction following intrinsic emotion regulation literature. But this was mediated by affect. So when Shushin approaches her boss at work after having dealt with a difficult patient, and she thinks that her boss is trying to help her see the situation in a positive light, it's likely that she has a higher positive affect, which lowers her burnout and heightens job satisfaction. Whereas if she interacts with her boss and he says, "Oh, get that frown off your face," she's more likely to experience negative affect, leading to higher burnout and lower job satisfaction. Now, why is this important? It really shows that leaders are pivotal in shaping work and well-being outcomes for their followers. The benefits of positive reappraisal extend to extrinsic regulation, but also in a collectivist sample. And so it's really important for leaders not only to help reappraise the feelings of their followers, but also to check in with them to make sure that they are being understood as reappraising. Because it seems that regulation is really in the eye of the beholder. And when leaders do this, they can really make a world of difference. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Hannah. All right, we're ready for, y'all are really doing good on time. We're ready for Catherine.
Thanks, Joanne. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you here at ARP. My name is Kaylee Lawson, and today I'm going to be discussing the development of temperament from late childhood through adolescence and their association with anxiety and depression during young adulthood. So, previous studies have found that adolescent temperament is concurrently related to anxiety and depression. However, we know little about whether adolescents with particular temperaments are more likely to grow up to become anxious and depressed young adults. Therefore, our research asks whether temperament trajectories from age 10 to 16, in particular the level and the slope, are associated with anxiety and depression at ages 19 and 21. To examine this question, we use data from the California Families Project, where 674 Mexican origin youth have been assessed annually across 11 years, beginning at age 10. To assess both self and parent-reported temperament at ages 10, 12, 14, and 16, we use the Early Adolescent Temperament Questionnaire, which captures 3 domains of temperament: effortful control, negative emotionality, and positive emotionality, as well as their respective facets. To assess self-reported anxiety and depression at ages 19 and 21, we use the Mini Mood and Anxiety Symptom Questionnaire, which assesses symptoms that are shared across anxiety and depression, known as general distress, as well as what is unique to each: anxious arousal and anhedonic depression. To analyze these data, we use latent growth curve models to capture changes in the temperament domains and facets from age 10 to 16. And then we correlated each individual's temperament trajectory, that is their level and slope, with anxiety and depression scores at ages 19 and 21. This table summarizes our results. We can see for effortful control, we found that individuals with lower initial levels and those who experienced greater decreases in effortful control from age 10 to 16 tended to have higher levels of general distress, anxious arousal, and anhedonic depression during young adulthood. And these domain level findings were largely driven by the activation control and attention facets. For negative emotionality, individuals with higher initial levels and greater increases from age 10 to 16 tended to experience higher levels of general distress, anxious arousal, and anhedonic depression during young adulthood. And these domain level findings were largely driven by the frustration and depressed mood facets. Finally, for positive emotionality, we found that individuals with lower initial levels and those who experienced greater decreases from age 10 to 16 tended to experience higher levels of anhedonic depression, but not general distress or anxious arousal during young adulthood. And these results were consistent across both the surgency and affiliation facets. Additionally, although the effects were generally consistent across our 2 young adulthood assessments, we did find that the effects were stronger at age 19 compared to age 21. And overall, these findings are consistent with trends from previous cross-sectional and short-term longitudinal studies, and they really highlight how temperament development during adolescence is related to mental health in young adulthood. Thank you all so much for your time, and feel free to reach out in the Q&A or via email if you'd like to chat about anything.
Thank you, Kaylee. All right, let's move on to Helena.
Okay, thank you, Joannie. Hello, everyone. My name is Helena, and today I'll present the research Dr. Felix Chang and I conducted on how absolute income and couples' relative income matters for life satisfaction. Before I go into the research details, I would like to ask you 2 questions. How do you feel if your partner earns more than you? Are you going to be more or less satisfied? Research has shown that life satisfaction fluctuates with income in 2 ways. First, the higher the amount of money you earn or the absolute income, the higher is the life satisfaction due to better living standards. Second, relative income, or how much money we earn in comparison with others, also matters for life satisfaction. According to the relative income hypothesis, earning less than one's reference group brings detrimental effects to one's subjective well-being. And this effect is probably due to social comparison. However, most research looked at absolute and relative income on a broader scale, and little has examined the association between relative income within heterosexual couples and their life satisfaction at different levels of absolute income. So the research question of our study is, what are the roles of absolute and relative income in heterosexual couples' satisfaction or happiness? In this context, absolute income represents total household income, and relative income refers to the relative positions of earning more or less than the partner. To answer this question, we retrieved data from a German socio-economic panel. We performed a cross-sectional analysis on WAVES 2018 with a sample size of almost 7,000 participants. For the analytic strategy, we used dyadic response surface analysis, which is second-order polynomial regression, while accounting for the interdependence of couples. This method is particularly useful when first there are two predictors, in our case are labor income from husbands and labor income from wives, and second, when these two predictors are associated with a single outcome, which in our case is life satisfaction of either husbands or wives. We also controlled for income from sources other than labor income and some demographic variables. For visualization, this method can produce cool but complicated 3D figures, just like the one shown on the screen right now. As an overview, the X and Y axes represent labor income. 0 represents the grand mean of husbands and wives' income. Negative numbers meaning less than the mean and vice versa. The Z-axis is life satisfaction, with 10 representing complete satisfaction with life. As you can probably tell, the figure allows us to visualize income as a continuous variable and also see how different income combinations are associated with life satisfaction. So here are the current results for 2018. We could unpack many things from these two images, but for now, I would like to ask for your attention on the red and the blue arrows. The red arrows confirms past research findings that higher absolute income is correlated with greater life satisfaction. As you can see, the red arrows in both figures increased as husbands and wives' income increased together, meaning that both husbands and wives were happier with increased total household income. The blue arrows for husband declined as husband's income decreased while wives' income increased. And this shows that, sure, husbands were happier with more money in the family, but they would be even more satisfied when they earn more than their partner. Because this trend only shows in husbands, potential income comparison within romantic relationships was observed in husbands only. This finding can also contribute to the discussion of gender roles and romantic relationship dynamics. If you would like to share your thoughts or ask any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Helena. All right, so next up is Mengxi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nancy. I'm very glad to be here today at the ARP conference to share our work with you on wisdom correlates. Wisdom is an ancient construct, but psychologists have only started to measure it empirically starting in the early 1990s. After over 30 years of empirical research on wisdom, a decent amount of evidence on wisdom correlates has accumulated. However, evidence is not always consistent across studies. We therefore decided to meta-analyze all the empirical studies that we can gather on wisdom correlates and see what conclusions we can draw about wisdom from these meta-analyses. In this study, we conducted 4 searches on PsycInfo to find articles that reported the association between wisdom on the one hand and age, intelligence, personality, and well-being on the other. We've also gathered studies both published and unpublished through calls for submissions. After coding all the studies, we used multi-level meta-analysis to calculate the summary correlations between wisdom and each of these constructs of interest. So in this slide, the first number to the left of a construct is the number of effect sizes that went into each of the meta-analysis, and the second number represents the number of samples of participants that went into the meta-analysis. We found that wisdom correlates largely dependent on how wisdom was measured. Some constructs marked in red here, including the big 5 personality traits, self-esteem, and the hedonic well-being, are only correlated with self-report measures of wisdom, whereas other constructs marked in teal, so intelligence, only correlated with performance measures of wisdom. Despite the large divide between these two measurement methodologies in terms of wisdom correlates, however, two constructs, openness and eudaimonic well-being, are correlated with both self-report and performance measures of wisdom. And it's on these two constructs that we'll focus on in this data Blitz. So when it comes to correlation between wisdom and openness, self-report wisdom measures had a larger correlation than performance wisdom measures. However, both of these correlations were significant. All but one wisdom measures was significantly correlated with openness. And most of these correlations were at least moderate in size by the standard of personality and social psychology. When it comes to the correlation between eudaimonic well-being and wisdom, we can see again that self-report wisdom measures showed a stronger correlation, though the correlation was significant for both self-report and performance wisdom measures. A closer look at the two dimensions of eudaimonic well-being, adjustment and growth, showed that this finding was driven by the growth dimension. Specifically, only the growth dimension was significantly correlated with both the self-report and performance wisdom measures. In fact, the measure was every measure of wisdom included in this meta-analysis. This project is the first to meta-analyze the empirical findings of wisdom correlates since the beginning of such research. We've demonstrated that wisdom measures diverge in their correlates and that such divergence is especially pronounced between the performance and self-report measurement approaches. However, openness and the growth dimension of the eudaimonic well-being are correlated with wisdom regardless of how wisdom was measured. We interpret this finding as suggesting that despite the differences between among wisdom researchers in how they conceptualize and operationalize wisdom, there's nonetheless commonality. Specifically, wisdom involves being intellectually curious and being oriented towards growth. That concludes my data Blitz, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.
Thanks so much, Mingxi. All right, let's move on to Keely.
All right. Hi, everyone. Today I am excited to share with you about a recent research project in which I examined the interplay between different attachment working models over time. According to attachment theory, people develop working models based on their experiences in close relationships. These schema-like structures encompass our expectations and beliefs regarding ourselves and other people. For example, people who are described as secure tend to have a positive self-view and feel comfortable turning to others for support. Attachment theorists believe that we develop a collection of different attachment working models throughout life. This includes a global working model, as well as relationship-specific working models of the important close others in our lives. Previous research has shown that although these different working models are distinct constructs, they are also somewhat interconnected, often sharing a number of features with one another. This raises an important question. Are changes in different working models associated with one another? Our research sought to answer that question. Specifically, we examined changes in people's global working models, as well as changes in 4 of their relationship-specific working models over time. That is, their attachment to their mother, father, romantic partner, and best friend. We analyzed data from 4,904 individuals who completed anywhere between 3 and 24 online survey assessments, which were taken about once every month. Using bivariate latent growth curve modeling, we examined both long-term changes in people's different working models, as well as short-term fluctuations in attachment. As shown on the right here, we not only considered their long-term trajectories of security over time, but also their short-term deviations from those trajectories, which are the red dashed lines. Our results revealed that the different working models people hold tend to change together over time, both over the long run and in the short term. Participants who grew more secure in any of their specific relationships over time also reported becoming more secure in general. Additionally, on occasions at which people reported feeling particularly insecure in any of their important relationships, they also reported feeling generally insecure. Similarly, we found associated long-term changes and co-occurring fluctuations across different specific relationships. So this means that when people feel a shift in security in one of their close relationships, like that with their romantic partner, they also see shifts in their other important specific relationships. This has critical implications for attachment research because if causal assumptions hold true, then security enhancing interventions that target a specific relationship could have far-reaching benefits. On the other hand, however, if someone per se were to enter into a new unhealthy relationship, this could have serious consequences for their overall sense of security, including that in their pre-existing close relationships. It is important to note that a majority of our participants were white and identified as female. Additionally, all of our participants were US residents. Therefore, this may limit the generalizability of our findings. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks so much, Keely. Okay, last but not least, let's hear from Mila.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mila Chitova, and I'm going to be talking about happy places today. So we often see people mentioning their happy place. Sometimes they refer to a specific spot that they really enjoy, and sometimes it is more about mental travel to a nice, pleasant space. However, we don't know much about these places and what psychological functions they actually have. So in this series of studies, we wanted to answer some of these questions. Specifically, how many people actually have a happy place? Are they different from the ones who don't? What does a happy place look like? And what is its purpose? In our first study, we presented a definition of a happy place to our participants, which was based on the definitions that we found on Urban Dictionary. It was as follows. Many people have what they call a happy place. This is a place in your mind that is called happy. It is a mental state achieved when one wants to avoid the unpleasant or uncomfortable. And then we ask if they have a happy place like that. We also ask them to describe it and also measure its subjective well-being and meaning in life of our participants. So we found that 67% of participants had a happy place. Then we compared those who did have a happy place to those who did not in terms of subjective well-being and meaning in life. We found that participants who reported having a happy place were higher on both of those variables compared to those who did not have it. So that tells us that people who have a happy place are different. But what does a happy place actually look like? Well, it turns out it depends on a person. Here are some of the examples from our participants. I'm sitting on the porch at my house. I am alone with a drink in my hand. I'm looking upon a sunset as it's going down. A place or even a time slot where there is a little worry. Overall sense of comfort and confidence. I am with my friends sitting around and talking. We're all really happy and laughing. It's warm and friendly environment. As you can see, these descriptions are quite different, as some of them are more about the feeling of happiness and comfort, while others imagine specific events. So we coded these written responses for a variety of attributes like the ones that I just mentioned and a variety of others as well, but we actually did not find any connection to other variables. So to sum up the findings of the first study, we found that a lot of people have a happy place and that people who have it are happier and have more meaningful lives. So in study 2 and 3, we aim to replicate the results of the first study, and we also wanted to see if having a happy place is connected to personality difference and emotion regulation strategies. So we replicated all of the findings of the first study in connection to subjective well-being and meaning in life. Also, 67% of participants in a student sample and 53% of participants in a Turk sample reported having a happy place. In these new studies, we also looked at personality traits, and we found that people who have a happy place are more agreeable and more extroverted. Then we looked at the emotion regulation strategies, and we found differences for cognitive reappraisal, which was measured with items like, when I want to feel more positive emotion, I change the way I'm thinking about the situation, and plan for problem solving, which was measured with items like, I made a plan of action and followed it. We were also interested in how people use their happy place, so we asked them. We found that most participants use it for both creating good feelings and coping with bad feelings, although some use it just for one or the other. So overall, we found that many people have a happy place. People who have it are happier, they have more meaningful lives, have better emotion regulation, and have different personality. However, we also asked participants in the last study, how often do they actually go to their happy place, and found a negative correlation with subjective well-being and meaning in life. Overall, this research is first to scientifically examine the lay idea of a happy place and its use as an emotion regulation strategy. But many questions still remain to be addressed by future research. Thank you, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mila. Okay, let's, I'm gonna clap in my room, but pretend we're like all clapping together, and yay, good job, everybody. That was excellent. Loved hearing about all this work. Now we can open it up for discussion. So I'm gonna hand it over to Kelsey, our co-host for today. And Kelsey, take it away.
All right, hi everyone. I've gotten a couple questions in the chat, so I'll read those off. The first one is for Allison. What was the correlation between the conscientiousness and the EF tasks, and how well did the EF tasks load onto the EF factor?
That is a great question. I think I might have a model right here that I can look at. The EF tasks loaded pretty highly. So we have a hierarchical model of executive function. Actually, I can share my screen and just show it. I don't know if that is clear, but it's a hierarchical model, and the EF tasks actually do pretty well on the common EF factor in terms of the correlations between executive functions and conscientiousness in this study. I don't know off the top of my head. I think that they were like around 0.2, so not very high. So there wasn't too much overlap between conscientiousness and executive functions, but that's a great question.
Great, thank you, Allison. The next question is for Helena. How do you think your findings would be affected by individual differences in in parentheses, traditional or traditional gender role values?
That is a good question. And for the traditional gender roles, for the study, we can't really analyze the actual like what is the effect of gender roles in our study. But in my expectations or in my interpretations of this finding is that traditional gender roles is males should go out and earn money and females should stay at home doing chores and taking care of children. And these expectations might have changed over time and as females are entering the workplace. So we are considering to look at the longitudinal data set and see how gender roles and individual differences may play in a role in this one.
Thank you. So those are the only questions that I got for the session. So if anyone else has a question, send it now or forever speak your piece or keep your peace or find the presenters potentially at the session. Okay, no, actually we have a question coming in for Mila. So this question says, you stated that frequent visits to the happy place resulted in negative effect on well-being. Were you able to determine that number? And do you think that this would be beneficial, like helping people find and go to their happy place would be beneficial to treating mood disorders?
Okay, it's a great question. So that finding was very interesting for us because on one hand, like all these people who have a happy place are like doing so much better on all these different things. And then on the other hand, we found this correlation. However, it was just a correlation. So the one interpretation that we have for that is that potentially it's kind of the causal chain would be that the person's actually experiencing a lot of like bad stuff in, you know, whatever's happening. So they're using the happy place more kind of as a reaction to it. It's not, you know, the other way. But we haven't had a chance to actually test that with any data. So this is just a speculation. So in that way, I think that's why we're seeing this correlation. So it's actually not necessarily going to the happy place and using it as a disemotion regulation strategy. I don't think it's bad. It's just kind of a reflection of what's going on already with the person. So that's my personal take on it. But we need more data to really know what's going on.
Great, thank you, Mila. So I think that was for real our, oh no, sorry, there's another question for Mila that I didn't see, I got confused. All right, so this question is, do you anticipate having a happy place might have stronger impacts on well-being compared to other empirically supported happiness increasing interventions?
Excellent question. I don't know. That's an empirical question, right? So I haven't kind of compared it with anything yet. I just was wondering because this is something like the way kind of I got the idea to even study that because it's just something that people just talk about so much. And I was wondering kind of like, well, this is something that have not been empirically tested. So I wonder kind of how, you know, if that has an effect or if people who use this strategy are different. But obviously because those studies were just very initial. So it's, you know, they weren't that different from each other too, because we just really wanted to replicate a bunch of things that we found. So I think that that's, again, a kind of a question for future research, maybe comparing that as a strategy to other like positive psychological interventions that we know, like gratitude or savoring or things like that, that I think would be interesting to compare to that. But I'm sorry, again, I can't answer this question. But thank you for the question.
Okay, are there any others before I say we're done and we're not actually done? Okay, no
well, yeah, it seems like a good time to close. We hope that we'll catch you in about a minute in the GatherTown site. Thank you so much for sharing your work, everybody, and we'll see you in a minute.